All right, this is the next lesson in Weimar and Nazi Germany, Unit 3. This lesson focuses on the Nazi policies towards the church. So, by the end of this lesson, you need to have an understanding on three things. Describe why religion could have been a threat to Hitler and his regime, explain his approach to both Catholics and Protestants, and to assess why controlling the church was so important for the Nazis and Hitler. So the first thing, I want you to write each of these Christian ideas. And I want you to write down how the Nazi ideology might go against this idea. So just as a little starter, Christianity teaches love and forgiveness. Christianity also teaches helping the weak. Christianity teaches about respect for all people. And Christianity teaches about believing God. So I want you to have a think about how these ideas would go against the concept of the Nazis. Spend about 2 minutes, pause the video here, then move on. I will quickly go through it before we do anything. So, if we think back to Hitler's Mein Kampf, Christianity teaches love and forgiveness. However, Nazism does not teach this. Okay, I think this is the main thing we really need to understand. There is elements of hatred in Mein Kampf. You can link that to the Jewish argument that is in Mein Kampf. Forgiveness, Hitler does not believe in forgiving the weak and helpless. And if anything, love is not a concept really within Nazism. It is something that Hitler does not, it's really hard to say Nazism doesn't really follow love, but obviously forgiveness and love means that you are inclusive to a whole group of people. And Nazism were very much based on the Aryan race. And unless you were that Aryan race, you really didn't fit in to the Nazi regime. Helping the weak, well, this is total opposite. Okay. Now, the Nazis believe in a Darwinian theory. And that Darwinian theory is survival of the fittest. Basically, if you're weak, then you effectively don't survive. So this concept of Darwin's theory basically makes the Nazis, they're not helping the weak. If anything, the weak must be eradicated. And what that means is they must be removed from society. Respect for all people, again, unless you are Aryan, this is not a concept that is going to be followed. And belief in God. Now, in terms of Hitler, God was a threat, which sounds really daft, but Hitler wanted him and only him to be in a position of power, which is why Hitler had this totalitarian regime. So we can quite clearly see that Nazism contradicts the concepts of Christianity, and this could cause a problem for the Nazis as they grew in power. So what we need to understand first and foremost is how Hitler dealt with different religions. But before we do that, Hitler and religion. Okay, I want you to copy this paragraph in your books and fill in the correct words. Hitler could not blank religion straight away, as Germany was essentially a Christian country with 1/3 of people Roman Catholic and 2/3 blank. Hitler set up a ministry of church blank in 1935 to try to blank the hold that Catholics and Protestants had on the German population. In addition to the ministry, Hitler also set up the German blank movement in hope of replacing Christian values with blank values. However, only blank of the population joined it. Copy this paragraph down, pause the video here, and spend 5 minutes trying to work out where the words go in the gap exercise. Pause it here, 5 minutes, and then come back. Right, so Hitler could not weaken religion straight away, as Germany was essentially a Catholic country, with 1/3 of people Roman Catholic and 2/3 Protestant. Hitler set up the Ministry of Church Affairs in 1935 to... Oh, sorry, I've actually made a mistake here. So Hitler could not attack religion straight away, sorry. Hitler set up the Ministry of Church Affairs in 1935 to try and weaken the hold that Catholic and Protestants had on the German population. In addition to the ministry, Hitler set up the German faith movement in hope of replacing Christian values with non-Christian values. However, only 5% of the population joined it. So it's going to be really tough for Hitler to actually get religion controlled. So this lesson, you need to understand how he did it. Now, really, The Roman Catholics were probably harder than the Protestants, but we'll have a look at each one. So the first one we need to look at is if you put Hitler and the Catholics as a subheading. We're going to go through the next slide of information. I want you to write the questions down and answer them in full detail. Now, I'm going to underline some key points here as we go. Despite many Catholics supporting Hitler because of his opposition to communism, Hitler saw the Catholics as a threat to his Nazi state. And there were many reasons for this. Catholics owed their allegiance to the Pope, not Hitler. Hitler said people could be German or a Christian, not both. There were Catholic schools, which gave a different message to the Nazis. The Catholics supported the Centre Party, not the Nazis. Therefore, there was some possible opposition. Now, if you remember back to the Enabling Act of 1933, Hitler made a deal with the Catholics to stay out of their affairs as long as he got their vote for the Enabling Act. And it says here, at first, Hitler decided to cooperate with the Catholic Church. He signed a concordat with Pope Pius. Pope Pius agreed that Catholic Church would stay out of politics if Hitler stayed out of religion. However, within a few months, Hitler broke this agreement. How? He harassed priests and arrested them, many of them ending up in concentration camps. Catholic schools were abolished. Catholic youth movements were closed and they were encouraged to join the Hitler Youth. Monasteries were closed in Germany. And by 1937, Pope Pius realized that the Concordat was a waste of time, and he issued a strong criticism of the Nazi Party in a statement known as "with burning anxiety." This suggests that the Pope was really concerned about what the Nazis were doing in relation to the religious side of life. And really, how did the Nazis deal with the Catholics? They dealt with it by force, by arresting the priests, by abolishing Catholic schools, by encouraging children to join the Hitler Youth rather than the Catholic youth movements, by closing down the place of worship, by closing down symbolic areas such as monasteries. Hitler and the Catholics, that was a situation which was dealt with probably a lot easier than it could, than the Protestants potentially. However, it's harder to deal with the Catholics because of that allegiance to the Pope rather than Hitler. So there's loads of questions here. Give two reasons Hitler saw the Catholic Church as a threat to the Nazi regime. What did the Concordat aim to do? How did Hitler break the Concordat? Give two ways. What was Hitler's relationship like with Pope Pius? Explain why it was like this. And give three ways Hitler dealt with the threat of the Catholic Church. This should take you roughly about 10 minutes. If you write the questions out and then spend 10 minutes answering them using this information, so it's probably best to pause the video here and then move forward answering the questions. I won't go through these, but if you do have any questions, please pop them on Show My Homework, and then we can go through them when you return. Now, this is quite a symbolic picture. What does this suggest about Nazi attitude to religion? Look at this. The Nazi, you can obviously tell it's a Nazi because of the swastika. And they are stabbing the Bible, saying this is the enemy. This is direct correlation about how they felt towards Catholicism, because they thought that the Bible was the enemy towards Nazi Germany due to its differing messages that it presented in comparison to Hitler's Mein Kampf. Okay, the next subheading that you need to write is Hitler and the Protestants. Again, read through the next slide, write the questions down and answer them in full detail. I'll read through it again and do a little bit of underlining. So, Protestantism wasn't as difficult as Catholicism. So there were some Protestants who admired Hitler. They were called the German Christians. They wanted to work with Hitler and establish the Reich Church. That means like the Empire Church. The Reich Church would aim to combine all Protestants under one church. The leader was a man called Ludwig Müller, who was a member of the Nazi Party and became the church's national leader in September 1933. There were some rules for the Reich Church bishops. So if you were part of the Reich Church, you had to. Protestant pastors who supported Hitler could continue to provide church services. Protestant pastors, so these are the people that deliver the messages, had to ensure the church led the Nazi message, including showing the swastika, having Mein Kampf instead of the Bible, and huge portraits of Hitler across the churches. The Nazis also stated that any Jewish teachings would be removed from the Reich Church. Now, anyone that has an idea of religious studies, basically should this have this understanding that a lot of the Bible is actually made up of Jewish teachings. So a lot of it was actually, removed from the Reich Church. However, some Protestant pastors did not accept the Reich Church. The most famous of these was a man called Martin Niemöller. We're going to look at Niemöller in a lot more detail later, but this man openly opposed the Nazi movement. So by having the Reich Church, Pastor Niemöller was not happy. He didn't agree with Germans banning Jews becoming Christians. He was constantly arrested between 1934 to 1937 as the Gestapo tapped his phone. This is why Niemöller was a big threat. In 1933, he set up the Pastor Emergency League, which later set up the Confessional Church. This meant there were two different Protestant churches in Germany with 6,000 pastors joining the Confession Church, opposing the Nazi Party. Hitler did not agree with this level of opposition, and by 1938, Niemöller was put in solitary confinement in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. So there was open opposition to the Nazis from the Protestant pastor, Martin Niemöller. It's really important to understand that even though the Nazis were feared, there is still an element of opposition that we need to look at later in the course. And Niemöller was a really important part to this. So the questions that you need to answer: what was the aim of the Reich Church? Give two rules that Protestant pastors had to follow. Who was the most famous opposition to the Reich Church? What did this person not agree with? And how did he oppose the Reich Church? And what happened to him? Key thing there is the setting up of the PEL. 10 minutes for this. How did the Nazis deal with Protestants? And remember, it was easy to a degree that the Nazis wanted to set up the Reich Church, but there were a lot of people, there were a small group of people that didn't agree with it, which could have caused problems for Hitler's idea of creating this empire where everyone followed him. Pause the video now and spend 10 minutes writing out the questions and popping the answers underneath it. Right, your fourth task, and this is the last task of the lesson today. Did the Nazis succeed in controlling the churches? Now, to be honest, this isn't, most of this actually isn't in the textbook that we have, but actually it's a lot of detail. If you've got something like religion, you'd need to be very specific. It's definitely something you cannot be vague with. Did the Nazis succeed in controlling the churches? You need to create a table in your book. Agree that they did, disagree that they didn't, using the information on this slide. So you could, for example, say they were successful because they broke the Concordat. They were successful because they set up the Reich Church, which brought all Protestants together. Once you've created your table using this information, you need to write a paragraph explaining whether you think the Nazis succeeded in controlling churches or not. Once you've done that, just write an agree, a disagree, and a little conclusion about whether you think the Nazis succeeded in controlling the churches. And to be honest, there was a big reason why they succeeded, but there is going to be a phrase that I'm going to introduce now. A lot of people in Germany, the only way they could oppose is through sort of like passive resistance, which means subtle refusal. So it's a bit like if someone was sitting in the class and they refused to write after the teacher told them. It's like that passive refusal. Passive resistance was probably the biggest threat to Nazis because it was little things like not doing the Heil Hitler. It's things like that really did put pressure maybe on the Nazis. You could argue as well that actually to purge the church is a very dangerous thing to do, and it's something that Hitler really couldn't do significantly because of the repercussions it could have had across the world. Now, this isn't homework, but it's worth looking at. How useful is source C for an inquiry into the attitudes of the Nazis to the Christian church? If you wanted to look at doing content, own knowledge, provenance, remember, for this question here, you need to focus on three things. And we're quickly going to do just a little bit of recall on how you do this. So how would you do this question? So this source is useful as it shows me. What does it show you about Nazi attitudes? And then back it up with a description. Own knowledge, back it up with 3 to 4 lines of specific own knowledge that links to the content, and then provenance. Key things about provenance: who wrote it, why was it written, when was it written, where and by. So who, what, and what type of source is it? look at this straight away. He's a communist artist. So straight away, is that going to be useful? Probably not. But you do need to think about utility. You need to think about why it would be useful. The fact that it does show, it shows someone's viewpoint from outside the Nazis, which means, yes, even though it could be to make the Nazis look bad, this person might not have wanted to do that due to fear of the Nazis. So if you want to give that a go, write in a short paragraph, that's more than welcome. That's all you need to know on this lesson today. If you've got any questions, pop it on Share My Homework and I'll happily help you.